suspected those people is basically when they actually move the coins, right? When they actually move them, they could actually get metadata around the movement of those coins and start doing all the analysts on that and then suspecting and getting a suspect, right? And then maybe having an op on those individual suspects and then going in further, right? So it's a lot of it's speculation, but like just gaming it out like that and how they're, because like you have to assume that in the very beginning, there was no idea who these individuals were when they did the hack. And then you have to base everything off of them doing subsequential things with those coins because they knew the location of those coins. And so watching those coin interactions on chain, trying to link that to metadata, et cetera, and then coming up with suspects and then putting an op on those suspects to further the investigation.
It's also to do with the warrants and the right and these closed courts and things allowing those types of searches. So let's all appreciate that all the metadata exists, but getting access to that metadata in a clean way is very difficult. You can compel a company provide that metadata. You can work with third-party groups that purchase that metadata and aggregate it for some of these different institutions and industries. But it takes time. And I can only say that because I've audited a bunch of my Bitcoin addresses with a lot of these on-chain tools, knowing that some of those were interacted with on known IP addresses that weren't using secure connections. And still, that information isn't readily available, even with these very expensive subscriptions to these services. So it's going to take time to collect all of that metadata and put it together as well, both from a legal standpoint and from just a logistical standpoint.
Yeah, I think it's just really a matter of this IP address along with the public addresses that were associated to the hacks pretty much.
One thing that people don't realize is that if you make a transaction and you go to a public block explorer, you have to assume that block explorer is basically logging IP information on certain transactions, and the U.S. government basically has access to that information. So if you do a transaction from the Bitfinex hack address and you look on the block explorer to see when the transaction is confirmed or not, they can log that IP and be like, well, only 5 people in the entire world were looking at this transaction when it was done and basically the 30 minutes thereafter the transaction. And then they can have that metadata. Well, these locations around the world with this, and this, and they start linking together a story.
So I'm trying to listen while
they start getting warrants. They start investigating those individuals. They start engaging on them. We've certainly had undercover police come into our business and on regular occasions ask us to sell coins, know what KYC and things. We always refuse because we're not money service providers. But appreciate that that's definitely going on.
We'll see.
And to Magoo's point, they're not just going to attack. They have to wait till they've got enough evidence, like Matt had suggested, right? They need to build up that evidence in person. They need to prove that those individuals have access to those funds. They need to make sure they can seize those funds. And they need to make sure that this is all going to hold up in court, being that a lot of these techniques are used by the government for this type of research and investigation is questionable at best. We've seen a lot of these cases fall apart due to poor practices by these investigators. So, I think you guys are onto it. Speculatively speaking, I'm a lawyer, so I can speak definitively. But I mean, everybody else here, it's good speculation.
Hey Alex, I just want to come back and I want to understand the claims you were making about me after I left the room and said you guys didn't know what you were talking about.
Oh no, I just made a joke about leverage. That's all.
You made a joke. Okay.
Yeah, Magoo said that you were mad because you were having a bad day, and I said you were mad because of Bitcoin leverage. Neil thought I was a liar. I was just referring to the British hodl rooms.
I don't trade, so I mean I trade GBTC, but that's different. That's a small position. And I don't trade.
I'm sorry if I offended you, Tina. I was just meaning so as a joke. I honestly do have care for you, and I find you very interesting in the space.
I unblocked you, but I thought it wasn't really very nice, so.
I appreciate that.
Well, to be fair, Tina, you did come into the room like a bull in a china shop. And
no, I came. Huddle. I came into the room because I have to tell you something. I'm not a fan of Tether either. I don't care about Bitfinex. I never did business with them. I don't care one way or the other. But at the end of the day, I am long Bitcoin, and if I'm going to
Log says, "Let Tomer speak and then we can shift." I said, "That's fine." Tina kind of scares me.
And against
Well,
companies,
we weren't
particularly.
making accusations. We were
We kind of
speculating.
were.
And the
Well, you
same
kinda, you
thing.
kind,
It's the
can
same thing that you were,
Coddle,
Tina. Tina, it
Magoo,
was the same thing that you were doing on your Twitter feed. You speculated on your Twitter feed, retweeting Bitfinex saying, "Oh, this is good news for Twitter because they're going to get their coins back."
for
That's
Bitfinex,
speculation.
not for Twitter. Yes,
That's speculation.
Okay. But my point to you guys is there's a legal process. So
well, it seemed like the legal expert in the room was agreeing with us after the fact.
Yeah, no. Absolutely. My whole point was just get a lawyer to discuss it. That was my entire point.
Even one lawyer's opinion, Tina, doesn't. Because this could go either way.
Doesn't. Totally
or 100 lawyers.
Totally,
we have to see how this all
right.
matures.
But you were also talking about your negative views on what you say Bitfinex did. I couldn't even tell you all the things Bitfinex did or didn't do. I state right up front that I'm not that knowledgeable. But I was just wondering what the entire point of that was, and so.
The only point it was, Tina.
I'm not defending Bitfinex. I don't care.
The only point we were trying to make is we were saying that we don't think the U.S. government is going to be that quick to just hand Bitfinex the coins back.
Well, probably not. I mean, these things always take time. There are little processes. They're not likely going to take them and just send them back to whoever, because there's going to be a claims process.
And that's what we were saying. And essentially, when you came in hot and heavy, which is fine, but
you were kind of saying more than that.
No, but when you come in hot and heavy and you come into a room and start off with everyone's stupid, you
were kind of saying more. You were talking about the things you think Tether did and Bitfinex did and all these.
It was just related to the on-chain stuff, Tina. The stuff I'm talking about is just like well-known. I'm not wasn't speculation.
No. And all of those may be right, but at the end of the day, when it comes to the coins, there's a legal process, and I don't know what it was. As I said, I don't know what it was. But
whenever
all
you're
I
bored,
was suggesting is that you guys should get
Do you think
some lawyers in here discussing it?
Do you think I saw a tweet earlier where Samson Mao was congratulating
I saw that too.
Paulo,
and that may be wrong.
Well, I mean, I'm not sure. But like, to me, I was confused when I saw that, because at best it's kind of indifferent to Bitfinex. I'm sure they're not thrilled with news headlines showing that yes, we were hacked once upon in 2016. But
my guess is that most of the people who use that exchange probably know that.
No, I don't know. I think there's a whole
no one
whole generation
anymore,
of people
Tina.
who had no idea that they had been hacked for that much.
I mean, money launderers.
Well, they were regularly. They were hacked for 71 million. They weren't hacked for 4 billion. But I mean,
in today's
let's hear it wasn't hacked. But it wasn't hacked today.
But do you think is this actually so? No, but to the heart of the tweet. Is this actually good news? I don't understand why Samson was congratulating them. Is this?
It's narrative.
I don't know if it's good news or bad news. I don't see how it could be bad news. I think it's either good news or nothing news. But it is good, because I'm guessing that some of that Bitcoin will likely go to somebody.
The lawyers will spend most of it.
Yeah.
Maybe Hunter Biden.
Do you think?
For a long time.
Oh, I'm sorry. Hey, Tomer.
Oh, hey guys, I joined late and I've been reading up, and so I've got a curiosity. If you've already answered it, then I'll just have to find out later. But part of what I'm curious about is kind of all of the forensics
not just you.
The people who are alleged to have stolen the coins and attempted to have laundered them. Are the opinions that these people were very careless, or in a sense kind of stuck? Like my own sense, without having read much more of the news other than the reports, is like this would be very hard money to launder back to your own name, because it's pretty easy to follow the chain, and it's so much.
Yeah,
right?
that's
if you
what
were
we
going to
were
steal
talking
$1 million,
about. Is basically these individuals. We don't know what the actual exploit was, so we don't know if it was sophisticated or they just got somewhat lucky to get this coin. But looking at how they were storing the actual Bitcoin after the fact and after the hack, lets us know that they're not very sophisticated, because if you really wanted to try to avoid detection, you would not, or try to launder it back into your own personal name or some dummy name. You would not be holding the Bitcoin in one address or one UTXO. You would create scripts that would wash this money infinitely through smaller UTXOs and cross-washing it all the way down to small UTXOs, potentially running some of those UTXOs through coin mixers, and just constantly moving.
I told them I'm prepped,
so you
but to
can
be
never
honest,
have
I don't see this momentum going away anytime soon.
where these
Your call.
coins actually are and what coins are actually associated to the thing. So the way that they stored them tells me that they're not super sophisticated, and it has not. And not only that, but where they stored the private keys being on an Excel file that was encrypted on a cloud storage just tells me everything that I need to know about how sophisticated these individuals are as well.
Well, let's not forget that false flags are going to happen in Bitcoin, and these guys might be patsies, speculatively speaking. And if we're speaking speculatively and about patsies, I just want to know how Hillary Clinton's involved and how her charity was a part of that.
It all comes back, doesn't it? Butter emails.
And in left field.
Emails.
Well, I expect to hear connections between these people and the World Economic Forum really soon. Joking, of course. So the general sense is these guys must have gotten lucky somehow, or were part of an inside job, but didn't know actually what they stole.
No, but that's the thing is most of these hackers get caught if they're once. Okay, I'm going to say it again. You're not interesting right up until the moment that you're interesting, and then all of a sudden, to all the techniques that Matt and Magoo went through earlier that we spoke about, you're very interesting, and they will spend years building a case against you, and they will use that traditional data to work against you, right?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I can only imagine how terrifying it must. I'm scared holding the amount of Bitcoin that I rightfully own. It's like,
well,
imagine
another thing that kind of has me questioning is these people were actually in Manhattan. When you have a hack of that type of nature and size, you have to make the conscious decision, no matter how good you are at your off-spec and basically hiding the funds, you have to make the conscious decision to never actually go back to any jurisdictions that have
yes.
So you have to make the conscious decision. I have $4 billion. No matter how smart and good I am at hiding this, I can never go back to any jurisdiction that can extradite me. Like this
you also have to guarantee your transactions and your activity never accidentally gets routed through those jurisdictions due to the nature of TCP/IP, right?
Right.
Yep.
I mean, the idea that all these details will come out. All these details will come out. I'll be super curious. The one that I'm curious about is how long were they, living incognito, underground, undercover, or did they never even try or care from 2016? Did they try to keep a low profile for a couple of years, and then after 4 years they said, hey, our shit's clean? Or were they just out and large this whole time? And it was really just the government trying to figure out how to get access to the
maybe it just costs that much to live in Manhattan these days.
Well, that's where all the billionaires are.
Yeah.
I did just want to ask one. Oh, sorry, Law, go ahead. I'll, if I have time, I'll ask them one more question.
Go ahead and ask.
No, it was. I lost my train of thought. Give me just a second to reclaim it. I've lost my train of thought. It'll come back to me. So,
all right, it'll come back. So, to me, it seems odd. The thing that seems the oddest to me is that they'd be making stupid videos on TikTok. I mean, if you had like $4 billion you stole, like, wouldn't you be thinking about other stuff?
That's my point.
Than making silly videos on TikTok. I mean, how could you even focus on that?
Exactly. Like that's where Tomer, like, if you didn't see that, like, apparently they think, or everyone thinks
that was actually going to be my question. While you were on this, like, it's like, what are you thinking?
It's so wild. Like, even if it was just still the same value of when they hacked it in the first place, 7 million or what? Like, what the fuck are you doing making TikToks? Like, what are you doing still in the U.S.? Like,
So
why not go to Vegas or Malta?
so this is what it comes down to.
How do I follow this?
These people are very, very, very smart, or they're very, very stupid. Because if you're actually creating a pseudonym online of actually being perceived as literally retarded, you could actually throw off the feds that are investigating you if you have any metadata associated to you with these transactions. And when the Fed looks into you and they find a TikTok basically showing that you're actually retarded, it can throw them off, right? So they're very, very smart or very.
I'm live
very
on YouTube
dumb,
right now.
One of the two.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with the latter.
What's that?
Yeah, I tend to agree just from the fact that the one private key was being held on a cloud storage. And then also looking at how they managed the funds after the hack, it just seemed very unsophisticated.
Okay, my not forensic investigative skills. So the Dutch Lichtenstein guy, the husband, it looks like he was tweeting. He was tweeting throughout 2021, here and there, going just a couple of times in the year. But then before 2021, you go all the way back to 2013.
I may just tell him to bail.
So there was a huge gap. And that's what I'm talking about. Like, it looks like he hadn't tweeted in almost 8 years. And then all of a sudden, 2021, he's starting to tweet some, random things throughout the year. So yeah, maybe they did live 3, 4, 5 years just completely in the dark. And then they're like, you know what? I think we're good. And then came out.
Well, no, if you look at like the Satoshi accounts on the P2P forums and the Satoshi emails being hacked in 2014 and things, if you were trying to force someone out of hiding, one of the techniques I would use would be to take over as much of their social media and their forward-facing previous presence as possible and start facilitating narratives that they might not necessarily agree with, and then hope that they try to recover those accounts, hope so they do so in ClearNet ways and with bad practices. So it might not even necessarily be them that started retweeting again if there was this heavy investigation going on in them. But again, just speculation.
Let's try to get everybody's final thoughts. We've been talking about this for 3.25 hours, and we're a quarter of an hour over the start of what's supposed to be Nate's show, The Bitcoin Effect. So let's get final thoughts and hand the stage over to Nate.
Don't do illegal things on blockchains. Tina, I'm sorry I offended you. I think you're rad. I ignored 99% of the DMs I get. I've never ignored yours because I only want good things for you. I hope everybody benefits from the things they learn from you and Log and everybody else up here on stage. Thank you for the time, and I appreciate you guys listening to my speculation.
Thank you, Alex. I appreciate that. I really value my reputation, and I try to give people an honest view of how I see things. And I don't leverage trade, and I would suggest other people not do it either. So I appreciate the apology, and I would like us to have a clean slate, you and I, Alex, and try to go forward in a way that we can both be happy with.
Yeah, really glad to hear that. Now I lost my train of thought. Oh yes, so we did get a lawyer on stage, Joe Carl Sari, who's still in the audience, and this is on YouTube, and I will go find where Joe speaks. So if anybody has missed it, wants to hear what he had to say about this seizure, you can go to the YouTube channel, The Bitcoin Spot, and within 10 minutes, 15 minutes or so, I should have found the timestamp so that you can skip right to that spot. With that, Nate, tell us what you've got planned for today. Oh, unless anyone else really needed to get another. I
had one last thing. If this today teaches you anything, it's to teach you how to actually properly manage your Bitcoin and not keep your private keys basically on a cloud storage device. So if this teaches us anything, regardless of all the speculation, it should teach you that you need to actually do proper UTXO management, proper key storage, and everything that goes along with that. Yeah, that's what I wanted to do.
Oh, I want to jump in on that. So I had this DM with a guy who I told him that Bitcoin's the least risky asset because it has no counterparty risk. And he shot back on Mt. Gox, and then he shot back again today on Bitfinex. And yes, if you manage your private keys, cold storage in Bitcoin has no counterparty risk. And I think, and I didn't quite add this in, I think eventually in the future, many organizations, businesses, and the like, now not today, but maybe 5-10 years from now, will use multi-sig, and that will be considered the only right way and legal way of doing it. So you might have, for instance, multiple custodians plus senior management, maybe
remind me
board
to get
members,
rid of
maybe
this
lawyers,
live stream as soon as we're done.
outside counsel, outside auditors.
The one I'm doing right now.
Managing large reserves that are held.
I mean, to make it private so that
and give cold storage.
I'm laughing at all this only because
Bitcoin
of the number of continued
risk. That is the world that
talking
I
points to go on here.
I think that will happen. We're not there yet, but that is the thing that makes this asset very special. And we come from a history in the last, since 2009, where that really wasn't possible. We're moving forward in time where private key management is very important. And I think we will see things developed this decade that will be very different from the past. And people need to properly evaluate why this asset is so special, what is unique about it, and the ability to preserve your
had we known
your wealth without counterparty risk. And I think that is one of the things that makes Bitcoin truly incredible.
Hey, Tesla did it. They bought $1.5 billion of Bitcoin. They held that in cold storage through these turbulent markets. It's now worth 1.7 billion. If they had held cash instead, it would be worth 1.3. And being that they have adversarial relationships with regulators, we can see this exactly what Tina's suggesting is already starting.
Okay, man, did you have a quick thought?
Yeah, real quick. I'll make it quick. I joined late, but I just wanted to thank everyone. One thing I want to bring up, I know someone asked earlier, well, how did they know to check out these people? I think a lot of us are overthinking it. You have to understand that human nature, it's very almost impossible to keep a secret. And the fact that they're in Manhattan, I mean, they had to have told people. And it's very easy for the feds and the police to basically create an investigation and find out where the secret's coming from. I don't think it was as sophisticated initially as people are thinking. It probably was just a word of mouth, and then they investigated it, and then we got to where we are now.
All right, let's turn it over to Nate. Nate, it's your show.
I was talking to Log on the DMs as you guys were talking. I'm like, I don't really want to yank this kind of momentum away from you guys. It was it's like they said, we spent 3 hours. I said, yeah, so what? I mean, you guys are still trucking like a train. I was like, hey, keep going. So we're going to talk about the GoFundMe thing. We're going to talk about Joe Biden. We're also going to talk about what's going on with Bitcoin in the Ukraine. So if you guys want to stick around, please do. This is going to be a little bit shortened show because I planned on going until about 4:30. But if you do choose to stick around, Joe, I did see you down in the audience. I did want to get your take on Joe Biden when we get to that segment. So if you're willing to stick around, that would be fantastic. In the meantime, let's go ahead and get this party started. GoFundMe is trying to steal money, and Tucker Carlson calls them out on it. What does Biden really want to do as far as Bitcoin regulations? What does that exactly mean? Because Bitcoin donations aren't just pouring into charities, but they're also pouring into the Ukraine. The question is, what are the ramifications of that, and what needs to happen to make sure that everything goes the way it should go? I want to get your opinions on that. I'm Nate Martin, and this is The Bitcoin Effect.
What on earth got you interested in Bitcoin and cryptocurrency?
Okay, so what's Bitcoin?
Bitcoin is...
So what's Bitcoin?
Inflation-resistant money.
Bitcoin is the strongest asset the human race has ever invented.
The Bitcoin Effect is proud to be part of the Bitcoin Spot, a collection of podcasts and forums on Twitter Spaces where you can participate in the conversation with some of the most knowledgeable names in Bitcoin. Visit thebitcoinspot.net for a glimpse of our lineup. I know this has been going on for a few days, if not a week or more already, but the whole Truckers for Freedom thing in Canada is causing quite a stir, and it should, and I think rightfully so. It's good to see that people are collecting and collecting well, and collecting peaceably to voice their concerns. And what's going on with the fundraising efforts that are trying to help these truckers as they are voicing those concerns has become concerning. And it's reached the level of being on national and international news. With GoFundMe literally trying to steal $8 million of the $10 million that was given for the truckers to other charities. And in fact, Tucker Carlson on his show brought that up, and he said he spoke at length about how websites such as GoFundMe and others are blocking funding to conservative movements. Moreover, he pointed out that Canadian truckers' Freedom Convoy, who are on the strike, are unable to raise funds. And he pointed out that they're now looking at cryptos to raise money and have started to receive donations through Tallycoin. Here's some of what he had to say.
So in the absence of GoFundMe doing what it's supposed to do, others are filling the gap. An alternative crowdfunding website called Give, Send, Go has stepped up and raised already more than $5 million for the truckers. How long till they try to shut that down too? Some Canadians are clearly worried about that. They're turning to cryptocurrency. Tallycoin, for example, is a small crowdfunding service that uses Bitcoin. It's not controlled by banks. That's the point.
So it's reaching levels, and it's giving people an opportunity to hear about Bitcoin and what its advantages are, specifically the freedom to be able to donate or spend your money however you choose without any ramifications or being frozen by any government. Speaking of government, we want to talk about Joe Biden, and he wants to use his executive authority to engage a number of different departments in exploring how digital assets are threatening the national security. Brad Palumbo in the Washington Examiner wrote his reason why he thinks it's a bad idea, and he opens an article that he wrote on the 5th. He said, during the 2020 presidential campaign, Joe Biden casually referred to the public having record players at home, and we can forgive him for that because he's 79 years old now. But Biden, nonetheless, now intends to attempt to regulate some of the most complicated and newfangled technology out there, cryptocurrency. And I was looking at Barron's, and the number of departments that he's got that he wants to engage in this whole thing include the State Department, the Treasury Department, the National Economic Council, and the Council of Economic Advisors. So he's kind of pulling out all the stops and trying to do something about cryptocurrency, although I don't think he doesn't understand one iota about it. And the fact is that you take a look further on, and I was talking about this at the last part of the introduction, which is Bitcoin donations go further than charities. Now Bitcoin donations are actually given to Ukrainian NGOs and volunteer groups, and that crypto is being raised and deployed for a variety of purposes, including equipping the Ukrainian army with military gear, medical supplies, and drones. And so what does this all mean? There are a number of different questions that can be asked about what needs to happen, because obviously the question comes up, are sanctions ever going to work again? Because now that there is a money that can be freely disbursed without being able to be blocked or changed by any government or bank entity, how is that going to work? So I'm hoping, I want to invite Joe up here. If you're willing to come in, let me get you an invitation to speak on that, because there's so much that's involved with the government, and the government wants to maintain control specifically of not only the monetary policy, but also how they deal with one another when they're trying to stop another country from being able to have military or other assets, and they're trying to stop the money from flowing in there so that they can't do that. Joe, tell me what's going on, because I know this is sort of in your wheelhouse as far as what can we expect from Joe Biden and the administration in the next number of weeks that that either we should be concerned about or shouldn't be concerned about. Can you kind of enlighten us as far as what's going on up there?
Sure. I think it's consistent with a long trend you've been seeing from policymakers, regulators, legislators, that they see this fast moving, exciting technology that consumers seem to love, that people are gravitating towards, particularly Bitcoin. And at the same time, they don't know how to deal with it. Whether it's pretext or not, they're raising these issues of national security considerations, money laundering. It's all over the news about how, that's the preferred vehicle of choice for money laundering among, cybercrime. So you have policymakers saying we need to do something, but not really having a clear grasp of what needs to be done. So with respect to what you were raising, I think you're referring to the news reports that have come out about the executive order coming from Biden that is expected at some point in February. Now, we don't have a whole lot of guidance. A lot of the reporting out there has just been, throwing out different ideas that he's going to direct different agencies and departments to look at different features of the market. I don't know if there's going to be anything specific, tangible coming from the executive order. It's anyone's guess. There's some reporting say that you may see some small things with respect to stablecoins, and we can talk about what those are. But to me, I looked at this as sort of an effort to try to get a hold of what's going on without even clearly grasping what's going on, which is, I think, consistent with what your comment was earlier.
Yeah, and I want to get more of your speculation on that, but I want to take a quick break and a commercial message real quick, and then we'll come back and get your speculation on that. Shamory is a fun and engaging game for the whole family. A twist on the familiar memory card game, playing Shamory will help you and your kids ask questions and learn about how Bitcoin mining works. A STEM-authenticated educational product, you can be sure Shamory will be a great help as you teach your kids about Bitcoin. Order yours today at shamory.com. That's SHAMORY.com and use the discount code EFFECT to save 10% off of your order. The conversations in this Twitter space are being recorded for use on various media platforms, and any contributors to the conversation irrevocably consent to the recording and distribution of reproductions of the contributor's voice and performance as part of this program. All right, I'm back with Joe Carlasare, who has agreed to come up and talk about what's in his wheelhouse, and that is the policy in Washington regarding Bitcoin. And we're speculating about what the Biden administration is trying to do when it comes with this upcoming executive order or series of executive orders, it may be, and Bitcoin and cryptocurrency or digital asset regulation. So, Joe, I'm sorry. Go ahead and continue what you were talking about. If you have some more speculation as far as what might come out of this.
Sure. So I guess the let's start with what is most probable. The most probable view of the order, I think, is going to be a task force or a joint committee with the various different policymakers. We tend to think of the government as a monolith, like it's the government, it's the Congress, it's the Treasury Department. But in reality, there are these very segmented, siloed parts of the government, and they don't talk to one another. So this makes any sort of coordination difficult, for one, and two, it makes them hard to get on the same page, where you have perhaps the SEC taking this position, then you have Treasury taking this position, and then you have parts of the DOJ taking a different position. So I think the EO, the executive order, at a minimum, is going to say we want these policymakers and various different bureaucrats to develop a coordinated policy response within all agents, all departments of the federal government, with some, SEC input in particular and CFTC input. So I think that's the most likely, result from that. I do think that you've seen a constant refrain from most bureaucrats and most legislators regarding stablecoins. They seem very focused on stablecoins. Gensler, he's given numerous media interviews discussing cryptocurrencies, and he's asked numerous times if he thinks that there is additional legislation that's needed. And his refrain is no. He thinks generally we have strong authority under existing case law and statutes to regulate investment contracts and securities in the space. However, he said, he's asked basically what one area you might need help in, and that's the area of stablecoins. So I would not be surprised at all if we get some new guidance and directives from Treasury on stablecoins. And to that end, I think you may get a working group that's going to issue recommendations to Congress on how to put a piece of legislation in effect on stablecoins. EOs, executive orders, tend not to have the kind of legislative teeth that you need to do real big things in a space. So I look at this as sort of laying the groundwork for some legislative package that's going to come later in the year.
Is that groundwork even going to, because they're talking about February, and I think that there are more departments involved in this process than there are days of the month left in February. So is it even really possible that they're going to get that done in that period of time?
Well, again, the order is going to, as I view it, is going to seek to convene a working group. So it's like in order to study how to deal with this in a coordinated manner. Now, you're going to need legislation to take care of big parts of this market. So the way to think about it is, I think you get an order. It says we have to have this working group that's going to both make policy recommendations. We're going to handle these sorts of anti-money laundering, cyber terrorism issues, and then we're going to propose legislation to follow. So I look at this EO that's coming as sort of the beginning rather than the end of the regulation you can expect in the near future.
Do you think they'll take it one step further, Joe, and actually put a crypto czar in place that has some oversight over all of the, because there's just so many aspects of government that are tied up in this, right? So yeah, I think they might go all the way to the czar.
Yeah. So the only comment we have, I think, from Jen
last time
Psaki on this is that they're looking to make a coordinated policy response. And whenever you hear that, you can expect there's going to be a quarterback that leads the team.
From the stage from last time.
And to the, Alex, your point, that's kind of like the czar discussion. So I would not be surprised at all. And I think that's what you should expect, some sort of chief bureaucrat that's going to coordinate between all these different agencies. And keep in mind, this is an exciting, developing area. Everybody's eyes are in crypto. Even people that don't understand it, their eyes are there. And I think to that point, you got a lot of infighting among the bureaucrats. I mean, we saw a little bit of this in the summer between CFTC and SEC saying, well, we want to regulate this and we want to regulate this. They fight over it, right? It's kind of like, you want that to fall in my jurisdiction so that you can claim it as your own and get additional resources to go after it. And if you listen to Chair Gensler's remarks, he said numerous times, we have the authority. This is our domain to go after all these quote unquote crypto things that are not Bitcoin. And to that end, we need more resources. We need more agents. We need more attorneys. We can, barely handle with the SEC versus Ripple case, let alone the other, thousands of quote unquote cryptos that are out there.
Right.
As they should, right? Because there's going to be a lot of positions created for these people in the near future.
There are a couple other people that have requested time on the stage. Humble and Miguel will go in that order. Humble, do you have a comment or question for Joe or just in general?
I was actually trying to pull something up, so if you can give me a second, that'd be great.
Sure, while you're doing that. Miguel, what do you got?
Hey, what's up, guys? I had a question because, those regulations coming, mostly they will affect stable coins and stuff, right? My question is, because if they're trying to tackle like money laundering, we know Bitcoin is not a good way to launder your money. Why would you want it to be on a public ledger that you're, transacting, making illegal things? And so why are they really doing this? Because I don't get it, especially because if they're going for stable coins, then what's going to happen is that we're going to have decentralized stable coins that they will not be able to be regulated. So what they're doing is kind of pointless, or that's kind of my point of view. What is the real reason behind this? Because I don't find any sense in it.
All scams end in Bitcoin. That's what all those criminals are using to buy after they take all those funds on those altcoins, those different bridging platforms, those aggregating platforms, right? All those smart people end up buying Bitcoin, so they need rules associated with it to go after those individuals that are taking advantage of Americans in unregulated ways, right?
In my simple, normal mind, is there such a thing as a decentralized stablecoin? That seems to be an oxymoron to me. Am I wrong about that?
Not at all.
Okay, so when you're talking about stable coins, those are easily seen because you basically just kind of go to that particular company. It's a company, and say, we want to see your ledger and we want to see what's going on. That kind of makes it a lot easier that way. So I really don't see where, Miggy, you might have had a problem or a question about how that's going to work when you're going to have stable coins that aren't going to be able to be either regulated or monitored in some fashion. So that's sort of my view on that. Who else? Let's see. Jacob, you're on the stage still. Are you left over from the last 3-hour discussion?
Oh, no,
okay.
No, I'm still here.
Do you have something?
Yeah, and actually, I can answer probably Mig's question a little bit better. I think his question was really showing the concern around like why they would waste their time creating this regulation and focusing on stablecoins. I think that, at least in my opinion, it begins to breach the doorway into having approved stablecoins. So you'll have USDC perhaps in the US, obviously not Tether. But again, I think it breaches that door, and I think it breaches the door to begin to approve them in a proxy way to being like a proxy CBDC. At least in the US, I can't really see many of us kind of going for a central bank digital currency. And so if you're looking for a proxy, USDC with regulation towards stablecoins, the same kind of regulation you'd see from a bank, which they've already voiced that they want to do, and then start going public potentially. I think that's more the focus around stablecoins.
I can't be the only one that sees stablecoins, at least the perspective from government, the IMF, the central banks, as an attack on the petrodollar, is it not? Or do we not assume the stablecoins are being thought of as a way to take control away from those centralized systems?
I think that the Fed is certainly looking at them as something that does take away control. Intentionally, perhaps not, because why not have a USDR, or I'm sorry, like a stable ruble, right? I'm sure that they will have one, but I think that there's this bleeding edge right now that USDC or any stablecoin pegged to the dollar still perpetuates that system. And so I think they're trying to really get in front of that system so that way we don't end up losing in this competitive race to like a digital yen.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that maybe they're not really that decentralized, but at least, the Terra Luna stablecoin thing or those algorithmic stablecoins, they're sort of decentralized in the way that, it's not like a company handles them. It's just, math and their algorithm. So
I understand what you mean there, and there's that level of like, well, if it's a little centralized, it's still centralized, and that's a lot of the trouble with many altcoins, right? Because people don't understand that they'll claim X is so more decentralized than Y, and it really doesn't make any sense. And to talk about USD or UST, like the Terra stablecoin, I think that's exactly why they're pushing the regulation so they can have this approved list of winners. And not to say that Terra should have a stablecoin pegged to the dollar, but I think that's, again, just further proof on why, especially after they served the founder, at least the SEC did.
Yeah, I think that Nate's point that he made about being less concerned is a really good one, and it's certainly enlightening my thinking right now, because these smaller centralized stablecoins are far easier for them to regulate. It's far easier for them to involve themselves with the people that set up these projects. It's far easier for them to attack the servers where these projects are being run. It's far easier to get their teams to compromise these projects in physical or digital ways. So, Nate, you've got me coming along to your thinking. Maybe the stable coins aren't so much of a concern as long as they're able to get their teeth in them. Certainly, they can't do that with Bitcoin, right?
No, they can't do that with Bitcoin. And obviously, my concern is in the race to become the preferred stablecoin. Here I go with my conspiracy theories. What kind of corruption is available to try to become that type of stablecoin? And who's going to take advantage of, the weakness of, whether it be bribes or, quid pro quo? That's what I worry about. I'm not so worried about being able to regulate them. I'm worried about the process and finding the one that they actually want to get to.
But I guess that was sort of my point, because if you try to regulate those stable coins, the technologies are just going to evolve into becoming more algorithmic and less centralized, right? More about math or programming. So let's say that
there's really no way to do that. because at its core, first of all, let's just talk about the terms. There's no such thing as a stable coin. The dollar fluctuates all the time. What you have is a theoretically pegged coin. You have one asset that tries to be matched with another asset. And whether they do that, there's a variety of ways. Like if your peg is maintained by something like treasury bills or cash deposits, one for one peg, like the USDC model, that's one thing. Or you could go the other extreme end of the spectrum is like Tether, which they're backing it with commercial paper, and theoretically they have to back it with a certain amount of assets. Now, in many ways, like this sort of formulation, I don't care, you can call it algorithmic or whatever, there has to be something behind it. There has to be some redeemable amount of value behind it, and you need to know what the parameters are. In many ways, what these entities that are issuing stablecoins are doing, they're trying to make effectively, they're trying to become a bank. They're trying to effectively say these are IOU tokens that you can go redeem for effectively $1. And if you're going to do that, if you're going to engage in activity, basically to make yourself out to be a bank, regardless of the entity issuing them, then you better comply with the banking regulations. Or if the banking regulations don't already suck you in under their scope and purview, then we need new banking regulations. And I think that's what the regulators are saying. They're saying that if you want to act like a bank and issue effectively digital IOUs, that you better comply with some sort of regulatory structure that we know you have the assets that you're claiming to hold to back your peg. Now, one final thing, like this is, again, it's a good point to illustrate why pretty much everything in the space, or I would say everything in the space but Bitcoin, makes no sense, because Bitcoin really doesn't depend on anything external to the blockchain. Bitcoin is the thing itself, like we say. With all these other assets, they still rely on this issue. You can call it, whether you call it the Oracle problem or you call it, the effective peg problem. You have to match it to something in the real world, and that always relies on some sort of trusted intermediary that's going to ensure something that's not native to the blockchain.
But that's not how USD or Terra Luna works. I mean, they're pegged to the Terra or the Luna token. So, I mean, they would have to essentially destroy or regulate their whole blockchain in order to regulate USD, right? Because it's not a treasury, it's not backed up by, dollars, but it's backed up by the same utility blockchain token in itself. So
I think there's 4 words that you say there, Miggy, that really are the key to this thing. They have to change. Okay, they have to change blank, whether it be the supply, whether it, whatever it is. And as soon as you say they, then you're saying that there is somebody who is controlling that supply, which therefore makes it centralized. Okay, if you say they have, you can't do that with Bitcoin. There is no changing Bitcoin because of the decentralization. And here's what my understanding is this. You can create a decentralized system, okay? And it took a long time, and in 2009, we got one. We got one. We have Bitcoin, okay? Now, the worst thing that can happen to Bitcoin is what could have happened to Bitcoin, and that was from the block size war, is that we have bigger blocks and it becomes more centralized. So you cannot take what's already centralized and make it decentralized. That doesn't work because there's always going to be somebody with a backdoor key to be able to change it. A decentralized system has to be built from scratch, and it has to be given to the public as a decentralized system. There's no other way to get around that.
But I guess, to my understanding, that's sort of how Terra works. Because when I meant they is the protocol, right? The algorithmic peg, whatever. I guess you can say they, the people maintaining, the Terra nodes or whatever. But if it's decentralized enough, are you gonna go after everybody running a Terra node? What are you going to do?
If it's decentralized enough, then there can't be the changes. You're not going to be able to make the changes. I mean, how long has it taken for any of the BIPs to be able to actually be taken into the protocol?
Yeah, I mean, to answer that for him, very long time. And I think also Nate was further pointing that even if you do have all these distributed nodes, that's fine, but you will still have the creators having had created it from a centralized position. And so you can't trust. Again, the whole point here is you don't need trust. We can just verify. So trust me, trust that, trust them. No, I don't want to. I don't care to. And so the point there is that, do we have, if they go fully decentralized, then we'd have to trust that they didn't build in something, or that the open source that they're exposing is truly the open source, right? So it's those concerns that kind of make things that move to be decentralized almost impossible. And that's why I made the point earlier, like you'll have so many people here try to say, well, it's a little bit more decentralized than that other thing. And it makes no sense.
Right. Right. Either it is or it isn't. There's no getting around it. I take a look at Bitcoin very similar to the way that Ben Franklin described the United States when they were asked, when Ben Franklin was asked, what type of government do we have? And he said, you have a republic if you can keep it. Okay. When Bitcoin was given to us, it was, what do we have? We have a decentralized peer-to-peer monetary system if you can keep it. And now that it's been to the point where we have so many thousands of nodes, I think we're closer to being able to keep it because consensus is a heck of a lot harder to get, which is what makes the protocol that much more rock solid to be able to put our money into and be able to trust that that money is going to have as much value when we spend it as when we earned it. So that's my 2 cents worth on that one. Going forward with that, because we're talking about centralized versus decentralized, we're talking about the ability to change things or the ability to freeze money, the ability to burn money or what have you. Let's talk about the other thing, which is the GoFundMe or the government or whomever as a centralized authority that, whether it be a company or government, that has the ability to say, no, you can't spend your money there. Okay. We've had that from a governmental issue from a long time, be it sanctions against Iran or Cuba or whatever country that the United States has chosen to choke off economically. Are they going to be able to continue to do that? Is the IMF going to be able to continue to do that? I think that is one of the fears that is on everybody's mind when you're talking about what Bitcoin is, and they're scrambling to try to put to try to put this thing back in the box. So, what is going to happen diplomatically, internationally, when it comes to being able to maintain some, I take a look at Iraq or Iran in their nuclear programs, or you take a look at Cuba and their ability to actually have any economic existence whatsoever. Is that going to change? And is anybody going to be able to stop it? And what changes diplomatically because it can't be, if it can't be? Can anybody kind of, chime in on that one?
I'll just say the Trident missile system is very sophisticated, and the U.S. has gone to war many times for control of the petrodollar, and I don't think they're going to stop now.
Is that the only threat that they have, though? Is militarily, or is there? Because that's what they wanted to avoid with sanctions. We don't want to actually pull the trigger. We want to try to punish them, put them in a corner until they realize their errant ways and come back and apologize, and then we can let them go back to their desks. Yeah, and unfortunately, it hasn't worked. So are we going to just say, well, if you don't do this, we're just going to pull the trigger? And I don't think that's what we want Bitcoin to become the precursor toward.
Nation state hackers are a concern too, right? That's been a growing concern with Pegasus and, the different groups out of Russia and North Korea and things of that nature. So I imagine America is only ramping up its involvement in that aspect of it as well.
Actually, to that point, I think it would be beyond naive to think that they haven't already been ramping that up. I think that the new kind of sanctioning that you will see will be almost a digitally militarized sanctioning, where we implement sanctions. If they're not being followed, then we end up attacking, but in a more digital manifestation of that warfare. And I think that it wouldn't really be far-fetched to assume that we've already probably created encoding mechanisms to encode digital assets, whether it be Bitcoin or anything else. Even better if it was a stable coin like USDC that's partnered with the government. Well, then certainly they would cowtail to whatever request they made, where let's say you were trying to send capital to China and we have sanctions on them. Fine. Well, we infected one of the billion stable coins you sent, or $1 billion worth of Bitcoin that you sent, somehow unknown to you. And then when that wallet received it and interacted with it, through whatever mechanism, we kind of infect your system, infect your new digital monetary system. I think that you'll see certainly tactics like that developed more and more.
I want to welcome Shane Hazel to the stage. What say you, sir? Welcome in.
Hey Nathan, thanks for having me up. No, I really this conversation is an awesome conversation in terms of the outlook long term. It's one of the areas where I'm super optimistic about what Bitcoin is going to provide. And obviously there's going to be a tumultuous, exchange at some point in some places, in regions. But I think for the most part, especially, in reference to, sanctions and how they work, this idea that we're, going to push, Bitcoin into culture and it's going to, be a reprieve from the normal, tyranny that, most people on earth experience to some level. I think it's got nothing but upside. There's great author Frederick Bastiat, and one of the great I guess focuses of Frederick Bastiat was in regards to, or at least attributed to him, is the idea that where goods and services and people cross borders, tanks and armies don't. And I think this is the probably one of the greatest upsides for the culture that Bitcoin's going to create is this idea that we can have influence, we can trade with each other, we can start to break down these barriers that are put in place by governments all over the world to keep their tax cattle basically in their little corrals in their countries under their control. And so I'm optimistic about it. I'm not saying that it's going to be picture perfect, and none of this is going to be, but I think we've got a heck of a better solution going forward than sanctions that hurt the poor and the middle class, and really just kind of, I guess, further the elites in those countries that we're trying to sanction and bring into alignment with the international banking cabal that is the Federal Reserve. But yeah, I think it's a great topic to discuss and kind of for the lack of a better term, war game in the long run to see where we might be able to head off some of the pitfalls that we might encounter.
Shane, let me just kind of banter these questions with you. I take a look at the obvious extreme example, which is North Korea, and how do you try to bring Bitcoin and the ideas of free market into a place that that literally those people fear for their lives because they really don't know anything else. And so, what are the obstacles that we face in trying to bring this Austrian free market economic knowledge to the people that they're basically being blocked from getting that knowledge? And how do we do that? How do we face those obstacles? What are the obstacles, and what do we need to do step by step?
Well, I think trying to go after people that really don't understand, and I'm talking about the populace of places like North Korea.
Okay.
I'm a big believer in you work where you can. You don't focus on what your weaknesses are. You focus on your strengths, and by populating in those areas that are susceptible, that are open, that we have connections into. It's going to be a slow and gradual creep. It'll be faster than any type of, takeover in history in terms of, monetary acceptance. But it's still going to take, us getting into those areas, into other places in the world that are, heavily sanctioned or, extremely poor or poverty stricken because of, their national policies or just, lack of infrastructure. I don't think that that's where we are going to push fastest, but I think, as time goes on, it's just an inevitability at some point where it's got to be done. And I think, that's a couple of the things that's going to aid us in doing this and in getting our technology, our understanding of, communications protocol and Austrian economics, low time preference, you name it, to places like North Korea and other very remote places are going to be guys like Elon Musk and Starlink and these low orbit type of communication devices that speed up our ability to communicate so that you don't have to be in a populated or densely populated area with a small gen set and a Starlink device. You can communicate, you can run your own nodes. You can even do mining, for God's sakes, at that point. So, it's focus on where you can, focus on fertile ground, focus on what you can get going, and then at that point, you save who you can. Is basically, in the next 10, 15 years, I think, is our time horizon in this. Focus where you can and get as many people on the ark as you possibly can at that point.
So to analogize what you've been talking about, basically, you and we need to focus on the low hanging fruit, and try to communicate the Bitcoin and free market economics the best that we can, and what benefits that they offer, and let Elon Musk build the ladders so that they can get to the fruit that's higher up on the tree. Is that basically what you're saying here, Shane?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is where we work best.
Okay, Mickey, you've had your hand up for a while. You have a question or comment?
Yeah. Maybe I think what's important to avoid, those like regulations or those sanctions, privacy, right, and privacy on Bitcoin, because in the nature that Bitcoin is, on, like, you cannot censor Bitcoin. So as long as you keep like your keys private and that you keep yourself private, I mean, it doesn't really matter, right? Because I'll give you an example. Let's say that I wanted to send Bitcoin to someone in China, and sure, maybe they will not be able to use it right there, right? But as long as they give me a Bitcoin address, I can send them Bitcoin, right? And then maybe they might travel to another country and use their Bitcoin outside of China, but I can still send Bitcoin to them, right? As long as the Chinese government doesn't necessarily know that it belongs, it doesn't even matter, because how are they gonna know, right? So I guess, or to me, the most important part is, the development and the use of those privacy protecting technologies such as Tor and, maybe what was being spoken in the TBS before about PGPs and all this encryption and, making sure that you're not giving away your personal information of, your Bitcoin balance, of whether you're using Bitcoin or not, so that way no one can actually stop you from using it, right?
That's true on an individual level. But I think what I'm trying to focus on here, and I think what Shane has been talking about as well, is, when we're talking about nation states and the borders between ideas, those ideas being between socialism / communism and between those nations that accept and encourage a free market economy. It's a heck of a lot more difficult to try to get past the stranglehold that a government like North Korea, or dare I say even China, without the Twitter spaces being turned off, those are a lot more difficult. Those ideals are a lot more difficult to get past because the government tries to hold on to them so hard.
Well, if they could regulate Bitcoin, they would, right? They have no ability to actually stop Bitcoin, and we see that with their inability to stop the torrent networks, piracy, privacy, pornography.
Mm-hmm.
They've never been able to regulate any of those industries, no matter how hard they tried, in a decentralized fashion. So to Shane's point, rather, what they're doing is they're focusing on what they can control. And right now, those are institutions and companies that are providing on and off-ramp services inside of their jurisdictions, right? And we got to be careful here, because I want more regulation in the space to benefit new users, to avoid some of these pitfalls. But if the U.S. governance, and keep in mind, every government around the world is probably having similar conversations, and there will continue to be people on both sides of that argument. It's probably going to take a very, very long time to draft all these laws in all of these different countries. Bitcoin doesn't care. Bitcoin Badger doesn't care about your politics. But what they can affect is they can affect the on and off ramps. And we're going to see that heavily going forward. Heavily, that's where the control is going to be as much as possible. But if they're too heavy-handed, this whole space will just further harden and decentralize itself to a point where they lose all ability to control it. So the U.S. governance needs to be very careful as they move forward here.
Biker, I want to ask you a question, then I'm going to get to Shane too. But before I do that, I want to take a quick break, and then I'll come back. And first, Biker, I want to ask you a question, then Shane, I want to get to you as well. So let me take a quick break. I'll be right after this. If you're listening to a replay of this episode of The Bitcoin Effect on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcast, thanks for joining us. Hey, consider leaving us a comment or a review saying you'd like to hear more of what we're doing here. It helps us out a lot and also helps others who don't know much about Bitcoin to discover this program. If you want to join the conversation, make sure to join me every Tuesday, 3 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard, 12 o'clock noon Pacific on Twitter Spaces. Visit thebitcoinspot.net and click the link to follow at the Bitcoin Spot and watch for the link in your feed. Biker, I wanted to ask you, because you said that there needs to be regulations. Tell me what your idea of a framework would be as far as regulations that are going to help Bitcoin.
I think we just look at the illegal activities in the traditional worlds and markets. We look at the way that money laundering and criminality has entered the art world, has entered the arbitrage world, the gold trade, and so many other of these areas. We look at the traditional Ponzi schemes and MLMs that affect, American citizens on a regular basis, and we look at the rule sets that have already been drafted for a lot of these different types of things. These money service providers, these unregulated, unregistered offerings, and essentially these scams. And I think that's what the U.S. government needs to focus on, is less the protocols, but more individuals that are taking advantage of American citizens using these protocols, if that makes sense.
Shane, what do you have to say?
I was going to further the point, the harder the U.S. goes with sanctions against a lot of these other countries, given, North Korea, Iran, I think it's also one of those things that's duplicitous, where it also helps them understand, possibly through other nation state actors and, obviously people that they interact with, it, this might actually be the cure for the sanctions itself. And so in terms of adopting, Bitcoin at a state level, it's going to incentivize them, the harder we sanction them as a quote unquote country or a nation state. So, to be able to push in that way as well, and then have the culture of Bitcoin, because let's face it, if they're going to understand it, they're going to have to rely on people who are extremely knowledgeable in this space. And this space is, look around, for the most part, this community is absolutely amazing in terms of education, in terms of what we believe in, the Austrian nature that underlines it. Like this is the, I don't know, this amazing, infective, state of Bitcoin is like, okay, you're going to adopt it to stay away from bad nation state actors. And at the same time, when you adopt it, it comes with a culture itself, which will be pervasive. And the people that can handle that will be successful within those governments, and those governments will, obviously bleed down one way or another to the people itself. So,
and Shane, to your point, our Bitcoin business, our mining operation, was literally audited up here in Canada by the CRA, and we willingly gave them all those addresses. And then they literally hired our team to teach the CRA how to audit Bitcoin. So how ridiculous is that?
That does seem a little ridiculous. Humble, you've got your hand up. What did you have to say?
Hey, Nate. I actually have a couple things. So following up on the sanctions, so it's whether it be sanctions or just a country figuring a workaround. Looks like Ukraine has actually been accepting cryptocurrency donations since 2018 via a couple different nonprofits, and they've been able to purchase various things to support their military. So I think what's kind of interesting too, now that we're hearing more about this and there's so much chaos in the world, I guess you could say, I think some of these use cases are going to be uncovered, and more people are going to be speaking to how they've actually used Bitcoin in the past. And it looks like they've actually accepted Bitcoin, Litecoin, and Ethereum. So one of the nonprofits went back to 2018. The other one was 2016. So it's a good period of time there. And the other thing I was going to say, as far as the regulations, so good guy, what you were saying. Oh, of course, my dog needs to freak out while I'm speaking. Oh, Amazon. Hang on, I'm sorry.
Let's see, what'd you get? I want to know what you got. Anyway,
I don't even know. I actually had I had a node that I haven't set up yet, and we had to order I think an SD card because we had the wrong one, so that might actually be it. But anyhow, okay. So when it comes to regulation, I was listening earlier a little bit into the digital assets and the future of finance via the House Committee on Financial Services, and they were speaking to the they're coming out with some educational materials, which I felt was interesting, and they just announced that. So the Treasury has come out with educational materials to speak on digital assets via the Financial Literacy Education Fund. So they've spent some time, and they're continuing to spend some time. So I find that pretty interesting that they're really wanting to narrow and zero in on that currently. So. The other thing I picked up, I actually have to watch the entire thing, but really, when they were talking about stable coins, they were saying, this was Liang that was speaking to this, that they felt there was a risk because of a concentration of economic power in stable coins. So I'm wondering what people think about that. Like, where would they be getting that in for? Why would they feel that way?
Yeah, that is curious. I would like to know about that. Miggy, you've had your hand up. You had a question, and then I will get to Red Canoe right after that. Go ahead, Miggy.
Yeah, I just wanted to share an example of how this privacy is actually, it doesn't even matter if it's at the individual level or as a nation state level, because of what is happening in El Salvador. Because right now, like, my government has Bitcoin, right? What if my government wants to transact with, I don't know, with Cuba, the United States, and North Korea through Bitcoin at the same time? I mean, they could. And how are they? I mean, unless they tell each other, they're not going to know, right?
And that's the question that I'm asking, though, is how are sanctions going to work in the future when you have countries that are able to transact without any oversight by any other international body? So that is the question that we've been going through. Red Canoe, you've asked to come to the stage. Welcome in.
I may have pushed the request by accident. I just got here, so I just catching up on what you guys are talking about.
Okay,
thanks, though.
Not a problem. I will get to Eric here just a second. I need to invite him to the stage, which I'm doing now. He can't hear me, though, because whenever you get invited to the stage, it just shuts off. Welcome to Twitter Spaces.
About the regulation, I think that there should be two types of regulation, though, because a regulation similar to El Salvador, in which, Bitcoin becomes legal tender or actually money, because, Bitcoin is a better form of money, or the best form of money for the people so far, right? As a technologically speaking. I think
I have regulation. I have an opinion on that as far as legal tender is concerned. I think those are the two worst words that you can use when you're talking about the use of or availability of Bitcoin or any money. I think that when you start using the word legal tender, then it's actually more of a fiat term than anything else. Hey, listen, why don't you just do what Portugal did and choose to not tax transactions that are done in Bitcoin? It's the same thing. Why don't you just do it the same? It's the same as what Malaysia did. It's not as though El Salvador really is the first country to allow for Bitcoin to not be taxed when it's utilized as a transaction device. They're really not the first, but they're the first one to use the term legal tender. And I think that we forget that. I was looking up earlier, I think there's 11 other countries that you can actually go and spend Bitcoin. At least there's one that was like up to $700 US or something like that. And I think they're actually looking at here in the United States too, as to having Bitcoin and digital transactions of up to $200 not even be counted in capital gains, registering for taxes. So we need to take a look at the fact that there are other nations out there that are actually treating Bitcoin as though it's a form of payment, and that's just my thoughts on that. Let's see, Eric, you are now up on the stage. Welcome in. What have you to say?
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in with regards to North Korea, Iran, all these avoidance of sanctions. I mean, that's just the prime evidence that Bitcoin as a technology is working. And, if it wasn't working, you wouldn't see these countries using it, because it is fundamentally the only solution that allows you to transact without any sort of third-party intervention. And I think that's just a sign of success, and we'll continue to see that not only for, obviously countries like El Salvador, but also Venezuela, anybody who's suffering from inflation. So.
Yeah, and the flavor of the week is America and Americans' interest in Bitcoin. But those winds have changed many times. It was China earlier this year before they went with some negative regulations that pushed a lot of that capital and intellectual flight and operating businesses out of China into other regions of the world. And we look at the opportunity around the world in places like France, which have 28 nuclear power facilities. If they start to embrace these technologies as well, we could see rapid development in many countries. Canada is approaching 10% of the hash rate of Bitcoin right now, as a very, very small part of the overall network. That's incredibly high, and that's in relation to beneficial regulation for those people to operate and exist with their cryptocurrency. So, where the Bitcoin is most favorable, that's where you'll see Bitcoiners going.
Eric, I also think that ultimately is going to be the reason why the U.S. and the more well-established, maybe even developed Western countries, if you will, are going to be the last to the table. They just have too much regulatory momentum built up in the system. And first of all, government doesn't know what the fuck they're doing anyways. So it's just inevitably whatever the announcement coming out from Biden is, national emergency this, national emergency that. It's just another attempt to stave off this inevitable tide, this inevitable transition to a superior monetary system.
Eric, when you say that, all the ability of El Salvador to transact with anyone that they choose, that just proves that Bitcoin is working. I'm going to take the other side of the coin here, just to kind of get your answer to this. What about the dangers of having nation states that are I'm looking for words. I speak for a living, and sometimes I totally lose them. But when you have enemies of or rivals or adversaries of the United States that are able to get funding from anywhere now without the United States being able to either monitor or stop it, doesn't that pose a danger? And how do you kind of rectify the fact that Bitcoin allows for that freedom, but it also allows for the dangers? Help me out with that?
We're only talking about $1 trillion right now. So realistically, the threat of a nation state gaining some sort of kinetic capacity through funding of Bitcoin, it is just a payment rail. It is a method of moving value. That is it currently. When we start pushing up into the 10x territory, another order of magnitude, then we can start talking. But I really just do not think, I mean, if you look at the potential amount of capital that can be accumulated and paid, there's been, 2-3 transactions, I think, that have been strongly identified as sending to the Taliban, for example, or any of these other entities. I really just don't think the economic majority of Bitcoin users currently, all of us, is going to be sufficient in terms of overall size for that to become a significant threat. I mean, really, we're talking about tens or 20s of millions of dollars right now.
And I don't disagree with you. And I know that I'm looking far out, but I'm that guy that says, this situation might come up in the long term. Do we have anybody that's actually thinking about this process? So I appreciate the fact that we're very early yet when it comes to dealing with those problems that might occur and they might not occur. These are just questions that come to my mind to say, these are problems that might occur. How do we deal with them if they do? So Eric, I appreciate that. Tang, you've been on the stage for a while. You had your hand up. You have a question or comment. Welcome to the stage.
Hey, thank you very much, man. Thanks for hosting this, and thanks for having me up.
You bet.
I just wanted to quick comment. I've got a few questions. Hopefully, get a decent discussion going. I heard earlier on that there was a mention of how will countries be sanctioned based on their usage of decentralized currencies like Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm still of this mind of, don't the World Bank and IMF still have quite sizable chunks of power and can literally blacklist countries or really stop them or make it difficult for them to do business with other countries and be prosperous with regards to their own territory if they were to use currencies that they don't want them to use, because Bitcoin has that kind of power that they're not comfortable with.
Yeah, it could get ugly. as Bitcoin's destroying the former system, some of those benefiting from that Cotillion effect could get violent. That's a possibility for sure, isn't it?
Absolutely. I think the way that you're seeing like the IMF juxtapose like what El Salvador is doing, I think that it's a very early precursor to that. To finish up Nate and Eric's.
Yeah, I wanted to comment on the freedom part because I thought that was interesting because freedom is like usually regarded as a double-edged sword, right? Because I mean, if you want to be free, you also want your friends to be free, right? But if your friends are free, so are your enemies, right? But I mean, if you want to be free and you want your friends to be free, so you also want your enemies to be free, right?
But that's why Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin, because of the game theory, because of the self-interest invested in Bitcoin, it's better to buy Bitcoin than it is to pay for a tank and to go to war with other countries, right? It gets to a point where mathematically, just being a good actor and associating yourself with Bitcoin is going to be the most beneficial thing these nation states can do, right? So I completely agree, but I think the way Bitcoin was designed is going to trump all the violence ultimately in the end.
But isn't that somewhat like difficult because like the thing about Bitcoin is as a concept, as an idea, you know, just for what it is, it's extremely powerful. But the issue with it, or at least one issue that I feel in my mind is that owning Bitcoin at the moment doesn't give you the same economic like power as holding any fiat currency, like holding dollars or holding pounds. And what I mean by that is if you hold dollars and you have a record of holding dollars and you're a good dollar holder, i.e., you know, your credit score isn't bad. There's a lot that you can do and there's a lot you can leverage with that. If you hold Bitcoin right now and you're a good Bitcoin hodler, who benefits you?
I would say probably the 200% year over year increase.
There is that. To kind of go off of that question, you know, for those of us that, you know, are just hodling and, you know, DCAing or trying to buy the dip as best that we can while still trying to feed our families and, you know, get our cars to and from work. You know, the issue right now is that the U.S. government has a stranglehold on credit specifically for home ownership or refinancing. Because in order for you to be able to be approved for a loan, you've got to have cash in the bank and you've got to have, you know, a W-2 which shows how many dollars you've made. And so the credit system is really in a stranglehold as far as the banking system in the U.S. government is concerned. And that's going to be another obstacle that I think that we need to jump over before we can get to any type of major, call it hyper-Bitcoinization. Anybody agree or disagree with that?
I think you're right.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think that it will come about, though. I think you're seeing like early forms of it in terms of like collateralization of assets.
At least that's what I feel is a big you're good. I wanted to mention that as well because I feel like that's a big thing because like Bitcoin is beautiful in its concept, in its idea, and just holding it like it's wonderful. But you know, price increase and yield, if that's the best that you know it can do for you, what happens like after the yield? Do you know what I mean? So thanks, Nate.
Sure. Monroe, you have been brought up to the stage. Welcome in. What have you to say?
She just asked me how my trade was in a private DM, so I don't know.
Oh, then, no. Okay.
I think it's a bot.
Yep.
I get followed by those too often. God,
that was a joke, but that's also what I'm assuming here.
Well, that being the case, talk amongst yourselves while I try to get Chad up here on the stage.
Bitcoin Badger doesn't care about politics. All this talk of politics amuses me to the highest degree. Regardless of what any government does, I will continue to expand my Bitcoin operation because it allows me to force my will on the world around me in the most literal way. It allows me to lobby for government in ways that benefit me. And you know, I think it's the chattest thing we can do is just if you must involve yourself with politics, please do so locally. If you must give money, give so to local causes that benefit those in your community. And if you must give your time to charity, please do so in a way that benefits those around you. And just keep buying Bitcoin.
Here, here.
So at least,
yeah, I agree completely. Just please don't forget, money is inherently political, so you will not be able to avoid it, unfortunately.
But with enough Bitcoin, you can force your will on it.
so
yeah, maybe
yeah,
then
so
we become threats to the U.S. government.
so at least good guy, you definitely would be backing and like stand with people going into their local communities and preaching the word of Bitcoin essentially.
Oh yeah, I'm preaching for the benefit of Bitcoin and rule sets and regulations that protect those people, allowing businesses to operate. I think in America specifically, it's going to roll out like the marijuana stuff did. Federally, it'll be murky for a very long time, but state by state, municipal, they're going to take a stance on how they feel about this issue, and those that take those stances first in the way that benefits Bitcoin will benefit their infrastructure and their citizens greatly, just like the legalization of marijuana did, and the hundreds of millions of dollars of taxable dollars introduced into those school systems there. And we're seeing now go on in places like Texas, which has its own independent power grid, which is decrepit, to say the least. That whole grid has been ignored and not maintained to any reasonable standard. And Bitcoin might ultimately be the only solution for those money-hungry monopolists to start to work out on that infrastructure for the benefit of those around them. So I think Bitcoin fixes this.
I concur.
Great comments. Chad, you have been brought up to the stage. Welcome in. What have you to say? Great here, by the way. Chad? Going once?
I think Chad wanted to bring up a point about the plebs in Rome, and we look at was it Greece, the early plebs?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
And we look at how they held on to their power. They became, without having a voting a basis, without having representation, they continued to sharpen their swords in a sense and hone their skills like Bitcoiners holding Bitcoin and self-sovereignty. And eventually they became the royal guards, right? And for the emperor. And then they became a represented group in society. I think Bitcoiners, in a passive way, without using violence, by holding that liquidity until the emperors come crawling to us for that liquidity, I think we'll get seats at the table in a similar way. We must learn from the plebs. We must understand we are the plebs.
Where would you say is the limit to force? Because that is something that is always on the cards, and that they won't refrain from pivoting to in whatever scenario, especially if they
Like
feel
the government's limits or
quite
like
losing
Bitcoin limits?
no, the government. So like us as the people, Bitcoin is our power. That's our claim to revolution. So us holding that is like that's the best chance we've got at changing the way things are today. Yeah, go on.
Well, I think that like Bitcoin is probably one of the greatest developments that kind of unites like the wealthiest and the poorest among us to have the same security over their assets. And to the point of the government using violence, I think that we've already seen that, whether it be the confiscation of firearms in China or confiscation of one's gold in the US, right? Like that wasn't done peacefully for those that didn't want to give up their gold. We might not have counts of it today, but still, if I didn't want to give up my gold and the government wanted it, what happens? Now, here in this situation, again, going back to what I first said, a billionaire and someone with $1,000 in their bank account can both have the same level of security through cold storage. Now, the offset they take is the level of security they truly have. So again, I think that like if there was a call to violence of any government to try to confiscate Bitcoin, it's kind of unconfiscatable in cold storage. I mean, unless they literally tortured you to get your seed, but it's kind of beside the point.
I mean, Bitcoin
Well,
is for
I
everyone.
also just want to point out a technical thing. It is entirely possible to have decoy passphrases for your seeds, and I strongly recommend this. Put a nominal amount of Bitcoin in one passphrase, which under a wrench attack you are willing to give away, and then have the rest of your Bitcoin, same seed, different passphrase, ultimately derives a different private key. This can be used to set up very well organized schemes which will prevent wrench attacks, at least to the point of your mental fortitude.
Jacob, to your point, Bitcoin is for everyone, right? It's for the rich and the poor. The same way that very poor people and very rich people all use bicycles, all wear flip-flops and all hang out at the beach. Those are like, it's a utility that everybody can benefit from. So it doesn't matter your financial status, your religious status, your regional a part of the world. It equally benefits the rich and the poor the same way as a bicycle does. It's very nice to have.
And to the threat of like country on country, real quick, just to sum that side up as well, first like the personal side, I think that is a very real possibility. Like attacks on physical locations like El Salvador with their mining facilities or something like that. But at the same time, we're uniquely at this point in history where we're so woke on every level that if the U.S. were to feel threatened or feel a threat to the petrodollar and go into El Salvador, well, globally, the reaction of that's going to be pretty intense. So it's this point of like walking on eggshells for majority of governments, except maybe China. But like it's just walking on eggshells for everyone. So what violence is there anymore? It's only this new age violence of, oh, they yelled at me. Oh, that's violence. No, the real threat of violence is I'm going to come take your stuff. That, again, I don't think is in the cards here for any of these countries. And eventually,
look at the Ukraine, right?
Yeah.
They reacted completely different this time. We've already got U.S.
100%.
government and government around the world starting to intervene ahead of time, right? So I think you make an incredible point, Jacob.
But I mean, you could also destroy mining farms with violence, or sure, maybe you won't be able to confiscate someone else's Bitcoin, but if you kill them and those Bitcoins are lost forever, you're essentially, making your Bitcoin more valuable. So I don't feel like Bitcoin necessarily is an answer to violence. I mean, yes, I do believe that Bitcoin can, make this cooperation economy, but it's not necessarily that it might completely remove violence from it, right?
Yeah, but I don't use Coinbase because of racist practices. I don't participate in companies that have evil business practices. If I thought some country, institution, or group was blowing up Bitcoiners in an effort to make their Bitcoin go up, guess what they're going to lose? Liquidity to most people's Bitcoin. They're no longer going to do business with them, right? This forward-facing chain, you can't get away from violence. It's going to follow you forever these days.
Yeah, I do get what you're saying, though. And I, in the realistic sense of what's going on here, I don't think that it completely eliminates violence. You're right. We could drone strike El Salvador's mining facilities, and maybe that helps ours. But the financial incentive, while it might be there to reduce supply of coin, I guess, in a way, I don't see the financial incentive there. And again, I think not even just a petrol system, because there was a system of violence before that, but I think that system leaked into petrol. Petrol has become more peaceful than that system where we would raid everyone's shit. And now it's at this system where it's a new evolution of that. And so no one really knows what will come about, but it's this intent to come through it through almost osmosis. This is a revolution of osmosis here, where just by over time, the irresponsibility of everyone else, we look even better.
Okay, we've all talked about, and you're all kind of answering the question very well. I want to get to last thoughts because it's just past the bottom of the hour. But I want to, basically, what are the ramifications of this? Bitcoin and international relations. We've been talking about that, but I want to get your view as to what it's all going to look like when Bitcoin becomes the primary monetary unit. And we're going to start with Chad. Quick 30 seconds, and we'll go down the line of those who are on the stage. And
sorry, I'm in the middle of eating. You can skip me.
No worries, Eric. What do you got?
Or kick.
Eric.
Yeah, I mean, listen, Bitcoin is the ultimate system to preserve your self-sovereignty. Like, I think everybody here in the room understands that. I'm on the side of personal liberty and freedom. I'm an anarchist. I came at this from initially maybe 2009, 2010, from a libertarian standpoint, but from there I went to minarchist, realizing that, yes, of course, the government should be reduced down to its minimum possible size. And then ultimately realizing, just following the Rothbardian perspective, reading The Ethics of Liberty and understanding the true meaning of what liberty and freedom is, by robbing the state of its capacity to issue money, we do rob them of a significant capacity of them to create and wage violence, not only in the form of war, but also funding the continuous growth of the cancer that is the regulatory state. And I really just believe that everybody obviously should be stacking sats, accumulate as much Bitcoin as possible so that you can be resilient against that state attack. If Joe Biden says that we need to buy fighter jets and nukes, I'm buying fighter jets and nukes.
Miggy, quickly, last thoughts.
Maybe just the importance on privacy and how, you know, that can skip pretty much any regulations, whether you're an individual, a company, or a group state. I think, you know, the less regulation, the better. And Bitcoin, I mean, it doesn't like laws doesn't really apply to Bitcoin, right? Just to the people, but not to Bitcoin itself. So in the sense, I think that the more private, the more freedom you have into Bitcoin, and that's what people should aim for. And maybe just to my last point, there is at the Adopting Bitcoin conference, there was this panel that was about free cities and Bitcoin, which talked about those local economies or locally governed cities that might form around Bitcoin, and how, you know, they manage their own circular economy, their own laws based into Bitcoin, etc. So I think that's what the future should aim for into Bitcoin.
All right, good.
Hey, Nate,
Yes.
in closing to your specific question, right? Cash has been used to incentivize governments all over the world to come to the interest of the petrodollar in America. And we've seen pallets and airplanes full of cash being moved around the world in relation to this. And there's still one problem with that cash. A lot of these countries and these adversarial places are dealing with security risks, and they're dealing with sanction risks. And Bitcoin is the best incentive. It's better than cash. It can be used without sanctions, and it can be hot dropped into interested parties' wallets without the need for logistical operations. So I think as the governments around the world adopt Bitcoin, I think to your point, Nate, it's going to be the number one incentive, and it will, instead of seeing planes full of cash flying around the world to leverage governments and patsies, it's all going to be Bitcoin to balance that interest, and maybe done so in a far less adversarial way.
Great points. Tang, your final thoughts, then we'll finish up with Jacob.
Haven't got a whole lot to say, man. I think it's been a great discussion this evening. I've been grateful to be up here. Thanks for hosting it. Definitely going to come back another time.
Glad to have you. Jacob, final thoughts, and then we'll be done for the day.
Yeah, thanks for closing with me. Again, on a more global macro level, I think that Bitcoin begins to break down the incentive structure that fiat kind of propped up, like a fiat incentive structure of spending, of lavishness. It's not to say you shouldn't have lavish things, but again, it's this system that does not incentivize saving. Why? Because inflation burns your dollar. And so I think Bitcoin has begun to wake people up to that. And I think that's at a macro level what's happening. I think it's like this new age awakening to fiscal responsibility. And so I think that one, it has a globalization effect where, like, again, good guys in the location he's in, I'm in a different location that we both know. And maybe there's someone over in Switzerland that we're having a great conversation with. It unites all of these different fronts. And it sucks that a lot of altcoins kind of have sapped up a lot of that space instead of it being taken seriously through Bitcoin. But again, I think that over time, all roads lead to Bitcoin. And so it's not important to think about this in a 10-year, 20-year range. It's important to think about this in a 500 to 1,000-year range. And I think that on a global macro level, this unites a lot of us, pushes out those incentives that have been here far before the U.S. You want to talk about Rothschilds, right? And so I think that as we move into the 500 to the 1,000, if we can make it that long anyway as a species, I think that's where things get really interesting, where we're united as one species with one truthful system of monetary understanding, one that is immutable. And then we can actually start worrying about things that are important, like global warming.
Well, I want to thank everybody that's been part of this discussion. It has been very entertaining for me. I've learned a lot from all of you guys, not only the people that have been on the stage and that had their closing thoughts, but I also want to thank Joe Carlasari for being here earlier, as well as Shane Hazel for opting to come in and be part of the conversation as well. Log, thank you for hosting this. This room will stay open for as long as you guys want to continue to have a conversation. Make sure to be on Twitter later today for Off the Deep End with Tomer Strode. Astrolight at 7:30 p.m. Eastern. That's 4:30 Pacific. Followed by Big Brain Bitcoin at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 Pacific, where you'll never know who might show up. Everybody, thank you very much for joining me. Make sure to join me next Tuesday for The Bitcoin Effect. Great conversation, everybody. Thanks, everybody, for joining me, and I'll look forward to seeing you again next week. Thanks, guys.
Nate,
Thanks,
you're such a pro that you like leave me without something to say. I was going to segue off of Jacob's point about Bitcoin bringing people together over the next 5,000 years, and Tomer is doing a show in a little under 3 hours. The theme tonight is Bitcoin: The Dawning of a New Age. And this should be pretty interesting. But Nate's such a pro; he's got everything covered, leaving me without much to say other than we're going to take a break until then. So we'll see you in a little under 3 hours. And in the meantime, as you may have noticed, streaming more than half of the shows now to YouTube. So follow the YouTube channel, The Bitcoin Spot, where you can catch up on anything that you missed. And we'll see you all a little later today.
Yeah, this is also going to be available on the Bitcoin Effect, where some of the graphics and articles are going to be up on the screen for the replay. So watch for that as well.
Yeah,
Thanks.
Nate, make sure you get Log's take more next time. He's been up here with all the experts. I tell you, Log over the last few weeks has been getting so sharp and becoming such a Chad and so well spoken on the topic. Every time he does speak up, I'm always so excited.
Why are you simping, good guy? Is there some favor you're going to be asking for soon?
No, man. I mean this, Log. You have learned so much, and you've become so well spoken on the subjects. You've been interviewing and dealing with so many very high level people on the topics and forming your own opinions. And you always speak of it like it's an opinion you've got from somewhere else, but certainly you've gotten to a point where you have a really good understanding, and I think your opinion, your personal opinion, is one that I highly respect in the space.
Biker,
So,
it was nothing personal, really. You know what? I was kind of going through the end of the show. I went, you know what? I don't think I've even talked to Log this entire hour that I've been here, and I've never done that. I always generally bring him up as a co-host and banter with him before we go into the conversation. But I was like, I think I skipped him today, dude. It was not on purpose, so forgive me for that.
No, that was fine. We had 3 hours of that space before you, and I had some other stuff I had to attend to. So I'm like, I'm glad there's enough people here for help Nate out, because I gotta do a couple other things.
All right. Well, always a pleasure. Again, guys, thanks for sticking around. Make sure to join me next week. Appreciate it. Take care.
All right, and see you all later today.